I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are recording, but I've turned off my camera because my connection is a little weak today. Um, I wanted to begin today by answering a question from our last public meeting directly. And that is, yes, I have read the one plant solution. And I am glad that question was asked because it gets at something important about WRCL's posture. Um, so WRCL is not built on the idea that nobody else has done serious work. It's quite the opposite. We are building from serious work that already exists. The question is not whether CANRA, Parabola Center, or the one plant solution matter. The question is how those contributions fit together and whether anyone is trying to turn them into one coherent federal architecture instead of leaving them in separate silos. WRCL's public framework says the job is deschedule, regulate, and align. That means the assessment is larger than any one paper, even a strong one. Let me show you exactly how I would answer that question in a clean, structured way. So here's the flow for today. First, I'm going to answer what I think the one plant paper gets right, then explain what CANRA adds from the regulator side, and explain what Parabola Center adds from the equity and constitutional side. And then I'll show where WRCL is larger than any of those individual contributions, not because WRCL is better in a performative sense, but because WRCL is trying to build the full operating architecture across adult use, hemp, medical, and treaty durability. That's the difference between citing good work and building a whole framework. So let me start with the paper that prompted the question. The one plant paper makes a serious and useful argument. Its basic position is that the federal government should remove botanical cannabis from the federal drug schedules, preserve state autonomy, and support state regulation with national standards for product safety, youth access prevention, marketing, taxation, and product authentication. That is a strong contribution because it addresses the absurdity of treating the same plant as two contradictory federal categories and calls for a more coherent federal approach. So that is exactly why I take it seriously. WRCL agrees with the core diagnosis. If the plant level contradiction remains in place, the rest of the system stays unstable. The one plant paper is especially useful on the question of reset, like how do we stop governing cannabis as a split plant and how we move toward national coherence. And that matters, and it absolutely begins in this conversation. Where WRCL goes further is that we do not stop at the reset. WRCL's public framework says the legal language and the federal framework have to travel together. The plant level fix is necessary, but it is not the whole operating system. So if one plant helps answer the plant level question, the next question is who helps answer the regulator question? So candor matters because it brings the perspective of agencies that are actually responsible for implementing cannabis and cannabinoid regulation. CANRA describes itself as a nonpartisan association of government agencies working toward jurisdictions that regulate cannabis and cannabinoids. And its mission explicitly includes public health, consumer safety, equity, and regulatory certainty. And that is exactly the kind of implementation realism that WRCL learns from. CANRA's hemp and cannabinoid materials are especially important because they spell out the practical gap in federal law. There are no federal finished product requirements for many cannabinoid hemp products around testing, packaging, labeling, contaminant controls, product type, or age gating, even while similar products in state cannabis systems are already regulated much more tightly. CANRA's testimony argues for a comprehensive federal regulatory framework that covers processing and manufacturing, ingredients, testing, packaging, labeling, serving size, education, and enforcement. And that is not abstract ideology. That is a regulator saying, if you're serious about legal markets, these are the minimum conditions you have to build. And that is why CANRA fits inside WRCL's regulate lane so naturally. WRCL's public framework already says the regulatory architecture must include product categories, guardrails, labeling, testing, manufacturing standards, commerce and finance, insurance, and reimbursement logic for the healthcare marketplace. So CANRA makes that lane more credible because it grounds it in regulator experience rather than just wishful language. So if one plant helps with the plant level reset, and CANRA helps with regulator guardrails, then Parabolis helps answer a different problem, which is what can go wrong constitutionally and structurally if federal reform is done badly. So a Parabola Center's contribution is crucial because it addresses a risk that too many federal reform conversations skip past. Their report argues that once federal prohibition ends, the Dormant Commerce Clause could threaten state residency requirements, social equity structures, and other intrastate protections that states built under prohibition. So, in plain English, a badly designed federal legalization framework could wipe out some of the very state tools that were built to support small businesses, equity applicants, worker protections, and the communities harmed by prohibition. So Parabola is not just warning about the problem, it also proposes a direction. Explicitly allow existing state cannabis laws to operate as designed, allow bona fide social equity businesses, small businesses, and worker owned businesses to engage in interstate commerce, and limit large corporations and consolidation. That is a serious attempt to protect repair and equity from being flattened by federal normalization. This matters enormously to us because WRCL's public guardrails already say that repair and social equity are not decorative language, and that large scale entrants can't be allowed to wipe out public interest goals, the state guardrails, and the community repair obligations just by default. So Parabola's work is not peripheral to WRCL at all. It sharpens one of our central design rules, which is that federal reform must be durable enough to protect equity and not just enough to mention it. So that brings us to the larger question is, what is WRCL doing that is bigger than citing any one of these contributions? So here's the cleanest way that I can say it. The one plant paper helps answer the plant level contradiction. CANRA helps answer the regulator and public safety question. And Parabola Center helps answer the constitutional and equity protection question. So WRCL is the larger framework that makes those pieces travel together. Our public architecture says the whole job is to deschedule, regulate, and align. Deschedule creates the lawful plant level foundation. Regulate builds the full federal operating system across adult use, medical, and hemp. And Align addresses the international contradiction, so domestic reform is not left resting on another legal fiction. Our own standard is very explicit. The scheduling language and the federal framework have to go hand in hand. So that is the larger WRCL frame. It's not one paper, not one sector, not one agency perspective or equity memo. It's a complete structure. And importantly, our public formation materials are also clear that no outside sector controls the work. Expertise from many sectors is welcome and required, but that ownership is not. And that matters because WRCL is trying to integrate serious outside work without becoming captured by any single institutional lens, because that's not possible. It just can't be done. So now let me be very specific about how WRCL expands on these publications. WRCL expands on these publications in at least 4 ways. First, we expand by building the full operating system across adult use, medical, and hemp. Um, the public framework is explicit that regulation is not one flat rule book. It includes product categories, labeling, testing, manufacturing standards, commerce and finance, insurance and reimbursement logic. That is broader than just saying one plant, one set of rules. It's a push to specify how the downstream lanes actually work. Secondly, WRCL expands by naming public interest guardrails upfront. Our public materials say that they are not decorative language, and we explicitly name public health, repair and social equity, medical access, and market integrity. And that means we're not satisfied with a framework that is coherent on paper, but hollow on consumer protections, equity, durability, or patient realities. Third, WRCL expands by connecting legality to real patient and market infrastructure. Our published work streams include medical access and coverage, whole plant and hemp integration, commerce, banking, insurance, and payment rails, and repair and social equity. So the framework is not just about whether the plant is legal, it is about whether the legal system is actually usable. So fourth, WRCL expands by adding the align lane, and this is critical. And it's one of WRCL's public distinctions is that domestic reform alone is not treated as the finished answer. It is not. WRCL's architecture includes treaty durable alignment because the coalition does not want to pretend that domestic reform resolves the international contradiction by magic. That is a larger frame than most domestic policy papers carry on their own. So the practical answer is this. WRCL is where plant level reset, regulator standards, equity protections, patient realities, market integrity, and treaty durability get assembled into one implementation framework. That is why this should not be framed as WRCL versus other publications. I do not want the room to hear this as a competition frame. WRCL is not here to pretend that CANRA or Parabola Center or the One Plant Solution don't matter. It is quite the opposite. They matter because each one contributes something very real to the mission: regulatory insight, constitutional durability, and plant level coherence. But WRCL is also not here to stop at the strongest available memo and call that done. Our public posture is that the work has to be lawful, useful, durable, and worthy of public trust. Responsibility comes with that public trust. And that means taking strong existing contributions and asking the next question: how do we make them live together inside a complete federal architecture that can survive contact with public health, repair, medicine, finance, commerce, and the international reality? So, with that framing, here is where I would ask the room. Um, First, what guardrails are missing if we want a federal framework that respects what one plant gets right on coherence, what CANRA gets right on regulation, and what Parabola gets right on equity durability? Second, which public health requirements need to be explicit so the framework can't be reduced into a profit first or loophole first model? Third, what protections for repair and social equity need to be named early and clearly so they survive federal normalization instead of being swept aside by scale, consolidation, or constitutional challenge? And fourth, what expertise is still missing across the WRCL build, especially around medical access, finance and insurance, testing, interstate commerce, and treaty alignment? The most useful feedback here is not general encouragement, it's a missing guardrail, a design flaw, a credibility concern, or a stronger path. And that's how this becomes a real framework instead of a good sounding one. So let me close with the cleanest answer to the original question. And that is the answer I want to leave you with, that one plant gives the plant level reset, CANRA gives the regulator guardrails, Parabola gives the equity and constitutional warnings, and WRCL is the larger framework that connects those pieces and expands them into deschedule, regulate, and align. So the ask is stronger architecture. If you can pressure test a draft, sharpen a guardrail, make an introduction, or strengthen a lane, that is useful. Our model already says people can contribute publicly or privately, visibly or quietly, as validators, advisors, contributors, or leads. The important thing is not performative support, it's real contribution to a framework that can hold. Thank you very much. I'd like to open the room up to any questions. So the question is, are you saying WRCL agrees with the one plant solution? Uh, WRCL agrees with the core diagnosis that the plant level contradiction has to end. The difference is that we treat that reset as the starting point for a larger whole plant implementation architecture and not the end of the assignment. Why bring CANRA into this at all? Because serious federal architecture cannot ignore what regulators already know about testing, labeling. CANRA's value is that it brings the implementation lens. And I guess if no one has any other questions today, I will wrap it up and this will be posted on the website and on LinkedIn soon. So thank you very much again for attending and I hope to see everybody again next week. Thank you.